channels. It is going to be recorded as well. Okay, so I will go ahead, and while you, Kelly, you can, you'll be sharing your slides. I'll go ahead and give a brief intro about this presentation and some information about you. So Kelly Weikle is our second presenter in the Smart Dialogue series this semester. She is a doctoral candidate and a graduate. Just a second. Sure. About this year. She's a graduate teaching associate in the School of Communication Studies at Ohio University Scripps College of Communication. Kelly has an MA from Ohio University and a Master's of Mass Communication from the University of South Carolina. She earned her BS in journalism with a major in public relations from West Virginia University. Kelly is an interpretive, interpersonal, and family communication scholar. Her research interests center on the role of communication in constructing identities. Context-wise, she focuses her work on parenting and motherhood. She's currently working on her dissertation, which explores how identity manifests as women experience postpartum depression and how mothers discursively accomplish the negotiation of their identities within and beyond their PPD experience. Her research talk today is titled, "Have you been in this position? Because your comment does not make sense. Discourse strategies and situated ideals of interaction on social networking sites for mothers." I'll go ahead and hand over our presentation to Kelly. You're welcome to start.
Thank you. And I just want to check before I get started to make sure that you all can see my PowerPoint. You can just see the presentation view, correct?
That's right.
Yes.
You just see the
Okay. Just wanted to make sure everything was correct there. So thank you so much. Again, my name is Kelly Weikle. I'm a doctoral candidate here at Ohio University in the Communication Study Department. And I'm here to talk to you today about some of my recent research where I looked at actually mom shaming on social media. And so what I did on this intro slide is I took the title of my research paper and I changed it into maybe some more user-friendly terms since I didn't know what disciplines everyone would be coming from today. So basically, I'm going to talk about mom shaming on social media, how it's done, how people respond, and what it says about online rules of interaction and US motherhood culture. And this research was accepted and I presented it last year at the National Communication Association conference. And the manuscript that came out of this research also has been accepted for publication and is currently in press right now. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to start off today by telling you a little bit more about my background, research background and focus. Then I'm going to get into the study background, talking about why I was interested in this topic and how my study came about. Then I'm going to talk about mom shaming, give you a little bit of information on what it is and what previous research has told us about it. Then I'll talk about communication, the communication theory that I used to do my research in this study, and also talk a little bit about qualitative research on social media. Then I'll get into my research method, my research questions, my method, tell you how I conducted the study, and then what I found, and the theoretical and practical implications of my findings. As you already mentioned, I'm an interpretive scholar, so I use qualitative methods. I specialize in family and interpersonal communication. I also study motherhood and mothering. I'm really interested in discourse surrounding parenting and mothering and how that's related to social identities and group memberships. Some of my other research has been on social support mothers receive from fathers when mothers are breastfeeding, motherhood identity and breastfeeding, and again, my dissertation research where I'm looking at identity manifestations during postpartum depression. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I was interested in looking at talk on social media and kind of how this study came about. So, as well as my research focus in mothering, I am a mother of two. And that's really what got me interested in this culture of mothering, talk about mothering and identities of mothers. I'm also really interested in online interaction, and I'm fascinated with how people talk to each other online versus a face-to-face setting. So I was in a class for my graduate program called Language and Social Interaction, and we had to do a full study for that class. And at the same time, I'd been noticing this thing happening online surrounding motherhood and parenting, where I was seeing a lot of judgment and a lot of perhaps negative talk happening. And I really wanted to look into this more because I was picking up on something and I just wanted to understand what was going on. So to give you a very concrete example of what I was interested in, I actually, right here on this slide, I have an article that I saw just last week on Facebook. And I looked at the comments and I saw exactly the same thing that I had looked at in my study. So I thought I would share this with you. So this is an article from Facebook. It's from NPR and it's about a 6-year-old girl who tragically died on an amusement park in Colorado. And if you read the article, which I did, you'll find that there's really not a lot of details about what happened. They're not releasing much information. However, I clicked on the comment section because I couldn't help myself. And a lot of people thought they knew what happened. And I saw a lot of these comments, like the ones in the middle, where people were blaming the parents for this accident. So you can see the comments say, "I'm sorry, why is anyone going on a ride, let alone your 6-year-old child you have to sign a waiver for?" Another person said, "All the adults involved are complicit in her death, including the parents who signed the release." So this is something that I've seen in a lot of online spaces where there's talk about parenting. But I also saw a lot of comments that showed that people were having a problem with what the people in the middle were saying. And you can see evidence of this on the right, where somebody says, "Shocked at all the hate on this thread." Another person says, "People don't like that they're not in control of the world around them." And this is something else that I've also seen in my previous, when I was looking at social media. So when I took this class and I was seeing these things, I knew that I wanted to do a study looking at this kind of talk on social media. So first I want to talk about what discourse is, because this term has several different meanings and I do use it in a couple different ways. So mostly when I talk about discourse in this case, I'm really looking at talk between people. I'm looking at the function of languages, utterances, what language does for speakers and audiences, and other items such as what language does for identity. So in this type of qualitative study, I'm really looking at how we use language to structure society and social reality, and also how language reflects our society and social reality. This is why a qualitative method was particularly suited for what I wanted to examine in this case. Another type of discourse is what we sometimes call discourse with a capital D, where we're really looking more at ideologies or systems of meaning. And the ideologies and discourses with a capital D surrounding mothering in the United States are also present in this study. So why study interactions between people on social media pages that are targeted at mothers? First, I want to define what a social networking site for mothers is. So it's essentially a social media account or a page that is targeted toward mothers. That doesn't mean that everyone on there is a mother, but the content and the audience, the target audience is mothers. As you can see from this slide, moms use social media a lot. You can read the percentages here and see that social media really is a key part of mom's day, as said by Edison Research. Previous research has found that moms use social media to do things like keep in touch with family and friends, reduce isolation and loneliness, access information, judge their parenting performance against others, and also to offer and receive social support. De Los Santos and colleagues found that mothers discussed topics on social media, including topics surrounding parenting philosophies, lifestyle, and the role of the mother. And the role of the mother was particularly central to the content on social networking sites for mothers. Lupton and colleagues identified some positive outcomes of social media use by mothers, some of which are lifting self-esteem, lowering depression, and being introduced to alternative perspectives of motherhood. However, there are also negative outcomes associated with social media use by mothers, and I'm going to focus on social comparison on social media. So social comparison is when people take information from someone, in this case, someone in an online space, and relate that information to their own lives, making positive or negative self-judgments. We've all done this, right? We've all looked at an influencer's post on Instagram and either felt, wow, their life looks really great compared to mine, or maybe my life looks really great compared to theirs, or maybe somewhere in the middle. I also want to introduce mom shaming and define this term. Abbots and Moore define mom shaming as calling a mother out in person or online for a parenting choice she has made. Abbots and Moore also say that mothers have recognized that this judgment is due to insecurities related to their own parenting. So in other words, mom shaming online is really a manifestation of social comparison. Online social comparison has been linked to lower levels of perceived parental competence, role overload, higher levels of depression, and lower feelings of support. And furthermore, mom shaming is situated within this larger culture of, or larger ideologies of mothering in the United States, two of which are intensive mothering and combative mothering. So intensive mothering refers to a United States culture of mothering where the dominant belief is that children need constant nurturing by their biological mothers, who are the sole adults responsible for meeting the needs of the children. Mothers should rely on experts to guide them in child rearing, and mothers must devote almost all of their time and energy toward their children. More recently, Moore and Abbott identified an ideology of mothering in the United States that they call combative mothering. And this builds upon that intensive mothering ideology, but combative mothering refers to this normalization of the constant competition among mothers and the belief that there is one right way to be a mother and to mother. And in this research, they actually looked at news articles and also mommy blogs about mothering in their research. So with these negative outcomes, one might think that the best way to avoid these outcomes would be to simply log off social media or not have social media accounts. And in some of my other research where I've been asking participants about their social media use, I have seen that where people have told me that they have chosen to log off because they can't take it. However, as the data shows, most mothers are on social media. And Chalkin and Anderson reported that mothers have said in regards to Facebook, they feel that the barriers to opting out are too great because Facebook has really become an essential part of life. So what we have here is we have a lot of mothers interacting online in these spaces called social networking sites for mothers, and also this culture of mom shaming where mothers are competing with each other over parenting choices and philosophies. So rather than simply telling mothers to log online, a more practical solution would be to do research that can lead to suggesting ways that mothers can more thoughtfully engage in online interaction in order to reach their goals and also avoid certain outcomes. And that's where the theory that I use for this study comes in, which is called grounded practical theory. Grounded practical theory is a framework developed by Craig and Tracy, where the goal is to create a rational reconstruction of a communication practice in order to provide participants an understanding of how to act in a situation in order to achieve certain goals or avoid certain outcomes. This is a qualitative interpretive theory and method that was developed within the field of communication studies. And this reconstruction of the communication practice is done through 3 levels of examination: the problem level, the technical level, and the philosophical level. And I'll get into each of these as I present my findings and talk more about what they mean. So when a researcher is using grounded practical theory, you want to look at naturally occurring interactions. So this is not a theory that you're going to want to use if you're doing something in a lab, a simulated communication experience or experiment. And when developing a grounded practical theory of a communication practice, researchers are particularly interested in those moments of communication that presents problems for the interactants and requires reflection on the communication that's happening in those spaces. So that's how I knew that this theory was perfect for what I wanted to study, because I had already identified this problem and I had already seen people in various spaces having conversations about the conversations that were happening, otherwise known as meta communication. And in general, qualitative research helps us look at language and language use on social media, which can tell us important things about identities, big D discourses, and social reality within the parameters of what we're studying. Here's my research questions that I use to guide me in my research. They're very much related to the theory. And as you can see, I started out with mom shaming as the problem. So to gather my data, I used the specific method that's associated with grounded practical theory, which is called action implicative discourse analysis, or AIDA. So I followed this method to gather and analyze my data. I took a systematic approach to searching and identifying pages on Facebook that were targeted toward mothers. I ended up choosing 2 pages, both of which are public facing pages and had millions of followers. So they're very public settings. And what I did is I systematically went through these posts on each page and viewed the most relevant comments for each post, which is what typically shows up if you are looking at the post and you click the comments. If the comments were supportive in nature and, just maybe laughing at the post, something like that, I moved on until I found a post that had a most relevant comment that I identified as presenting a challenge for participants. And also other people had replied to that comment. And I wasn't so much looking at the actual posts, but the conversation that was happening beneath these posts. So I ended up with 2 posts. One is a post talking about a couple who adopted a child. The other post is just a link to an article about a woman who pumped breast milk while running a marathon. And I ended up with a total of 153 comments based on these posts. And again, what I did was I chose the conversations where there was clearly that tension, that problem identified through AIDA and GPT. So now I'm going to talk about what I found through my research. So I just want to do a double check again, make sure, is there any questions that you all have so far, or make sure you can see my screen fine and everything like that. Yeah? Okay, great.
Doing great. Yeah, we can
Okay.
see.
So the first thing that you do in a study where you're using grounded practical theory is identify the problem. And what's going on here and kind of how it's done. So I started out with a problem of mom shaming. Once I got looking into the data, I realized there's something going on here, but I didn't know if it was exactly what we call mom shaming. Clearly, people were seeing it as a problem based on their responses, but I had to think about what is it that I'm seeing and how is this different from what we think about as traditional mom shaming? So I went to my data to look to find answers for this. And what I found is that based on the participants' evaluations, a comment does not have to be made directly to the person whose actions are being judged in order to be considered as mom shaming. So many of the comments that participants identified as judgmental were not comments directly to a mother. And I've included in the little iPad graphic here on the top, this is part of one of the shaming comments that got a lot of discussion surrounding it. So I conceptualize this phenomenon as practice shaming, which is a negative evaluation of a parenting practice or ideal, but the comment is not directly addressed to the parent who engaged in that practice. Practice shaming presented a problem for the interactants in these spaces for several reasons. First, those who engaged in the same practice as the one being judged, they felt an implied judgment. As you can see here in the bottom half of that iPad graphic, where a commenter responded to suggest that we have our babies as a birth mother may be coerced is truly offensive, and then they go on. Receiver ambiguity is another problem interactants faced. So the mom featured in the post could actually be reading these comments, and the person who posted them might not know that. I actually did find evidence of this in my research. And then finally, those who make the practice shaming comment also have a problem because people are giving them negative feedback. So the next level in a grounded practical theory study is called the technical level, or basically how people engage and respond. Here you're looking at different discourse strategies that individuals are using. What kind of language tools are they using to have these conversations, and what do they do? I identified 4 different types of discourse strategies: antagonistic questioning, sharing personal experience, direct insults, and emoji use. And I'm going to go through each of these, and as well as give you examples. So the first one was antagonistic questioning. Participants used this type of questioning to make and respond to comments within the Facebook threads. So comments were used to imply judgment against a mothering practice. As you can see here, user MB says, wouldn't it just have made more sense to breastfeed her baby rather than do it on the run? Question mark. Comments were also made, or questions were also made to identify a user's authority or ability to speak on a subject. And that's where I kind of get the title for my paper. Have you been in this position? Question mark. And then also comments and questions were made to evaluate the discourse. At the top, AW says, seriously, women, question mark, be better than this. So you can see that rather than using questions in this space to actually seek a response, questions were used to silence disagreement and differing opinions. The next discourse strategy that I found within the data was users were sharing personal experience. And again, this strategy was used both to make a shaming comment as well as to respond to others who are making that shaming comment. I have examples here on this slide as well. When participants responded to practice shaming comments, many drew upon their experience to situate themselves in the conversation and establish their authority. Another thing this strategy did was place interactants into in-groups and out-groups. So the in-group being those who share that experience, in this thread, breastfeeding, and the out-group being those who don't have that lived experience. So antagonistic questioning and personal experience are used interchangeably as strategies to deny the speaking authority of others and also claim one's own speaking authority and in-group status in this space. Another discourse strategy that was prevalent in the data was direct insults. Participants used a shame the shamer strategy to criticize the user making a shaming comment here. I pulled a number of comments from the posts here and put them up to give an example of what these direct insults look like. And so Suller in 2004 notes that in online communication, we often witness what's called toxic disinhibition in language. So you can kind of see this right here. This partly comes from an online environment that makes a user feel anonymous or invisible. and even like their online self exists separately from their real world self. So these discursive insults were used, or these direct insults were used discursively to show disapproval of those practice shaming comments. However, what I found interesting is that the interactants chose to respond to the shamer with increasingly insulting words. And finally, we can't talk about interaction on social media without acknowledging emojis and emoji use. So emoji use was prevalent throughout the posts and conversations happening. On this slide, I have one of the practice shaming comments that sparked a lot of debate and conversation. This original comment got a mix of positive and negative emoji reactions. However, the responses to this comment that received the most positive emoji reactions were the ones that evaluated this commenter's speech, showing that the interactants supported that negative evaluation of the practice shaming comment. So taking those discourse strategies, that technical level, and thinking about it, we move on to the last level in a grounded practical theory study, which is called the philosophical level. Or basically, what does this all mean? What does this say about online interaction in these spaces? In the philosophical level, the researcher is tasked with identifying the situated ideals of interaction present in that situation. And situated ideals are basically just participants' beliefs about good conduct in this space. So when participants are engaging in that meta communication, when they're saying things like, you shouldn't call this person out, or why are you being so hateful? They're evaluating that conversation and giving us clues into those situated ideals. So based on users' evaluations and their technical strategies, I identified 3 situated ideals in this space. The first was a situated ideal of speaking authority. So in these spaces, speaking authority belongs to those with personal experience on the discussion topic. The right to speak is related to one's lived experience as a mother in this situation. Second, there were actually conflicting ideals about the place of practice shaming in this setting. One ideal was that practice shaming is appropriate and welcome in these spaces. So this is evident first by just the prevalence of all the shaming comments, and second through the discursive strategies of antagonistic questioning and personal experience that were used to support one's own authority to make those practice shaming comments. And third, through the meta communication of participants who actually supported those comments or also gave positive emoji responses to those practice shaming comments. The other situated ideal around shaming was that practice shaming is not welcome on social networking sites for mothers. Yet the same discursive strategies that the shamers were using were also used to negatively evaluate those comments. So even while criticizing a participant's communication choices, a user would often resort to those same polarizing strategies, such as antagonistic questioning, denying of speaking authority, or direct insults to respond. So now I'm going to talk about why is this important and what we can draw from this study. Looking at a practice through a grounded practical theory approach provides us with both theoretical and practical implications. And I'm going to talk about both, starting with the theoretical one. So first, through this study, I identified the practice of practice shaming online, which looks like mom shaming, but it's slightly different because the comment is not made directly to the mother. Second, my findings further support the conceptualization of this ideology of combative mothering as defined by Moore and Abbott's. As you could see, there was a lot of competition going on around the right ways to mother and a normalization of this combative type of arguing about those right ways. Furthermore, individuals shared competing views not only in their ideas about mothering, but also in their ideas about how discourse about mothering should happen on these sites. And then finally, this study advances grounded practical theory by showing its usefulness in examining discourses related to families and parenting, which is not something that had been done before to my knowledge. And it also shows the value of using this theory in studying social media. So there is, to my knowledge, one study that has done this before, was more focused on marketing. So this takes an interpersonal communication approach. And then a really important part of any grounded practical theory study is to offer practical solutions to the people who are going to engage in whatever communication practice you've studied. In this case, I studied this interaction on social networking sites for mothers. So from my data, the first practical implication I identified is that interactants should choose their desired level of exposure on social media sites. I studied public-facing social media pages that had millions of followers. And so interactants in these spaces, they're in a public forum. They're reaching an audience that they may not know who's looking at their comments. There are other spaces that mothers can engage in on social media that are perhaps more private, Facebook groups being one example. Another important implication is that users should think about their goals for engagement in these spaces. So, because as I mentioned previously, what I found is that even when people didn't support the type of conversations that was happening on in these comment threads, the language that they used only served to create increased conflict and tension on these sites. So Amaro and colleagues have recommended that interactants foster a community of belonging and positive emotion, which can lead to more parenting satisfaction than for mothers than engaging in mom shaming. So users in this space can really try to avoid some of those polarizing strategies, those antagonistic questioning, using direct insults, denying someone else the authority to speak. Third, if one does want to engage in these spaces, a good way to establish your right to speak is to share personal experience with the topic at hand. So for example, if you want to talk about the benefits of breastfeeding, it will serve you well to share that your own experience that you did breastfeed your children. And then finally, using emojis offers a way for participants to show support or disagreement with what someone else says without opening themselves up to receiving direct feedback or direct insults or things like that. So that's all I have. Here's the references that I mentioned in this presentation. And with that, I am happy to take questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Kelly. That was a fascinating presentation, very practical. It is an issue that a lot of moms would be facing. And in the realm of wider communication research, how flaming has been studied over the years since the advent of the internet, I think it very much relates to that as well. So I thank you for this presentation, and I'll quickly ask you the first question and open the floor for questions from other participants who are here. So do you think that social media platforms have a responsibility in terms of highlighting or mitigating the negative effects of such public shaming that could happen on platforms like Facebook? Do you think that is the case? Or because, I mean, when we look at sites like YouTube, flaming has been studied for a while, and it's always there. There are always going to be few bad apples are going to be coming and saying all sorts of nasty things. A nice, healthy discussion could also be possible, but like what we saw from your sample as well, that's not what really happens. It really digresses into something more negative. So what do you think is the role of social platforms in this, if any?
That's a great question, and not something that I will admit that I've thought extensively about. What I have noticed is that, so for example, I did not study Facebook groups because of the private nature, there's a lot of involved with getting access to that. But I am in a lot of Facebook groups, and there's always rules of engagement. And so it seems like users are starting to modify or are starting to moderate those types of comments. So I know I was in a Facebook group that was called like Parenting in the Pandemic that had like thousands and thousands of people in it, but all the comments were moderated, and so you didn't see that type of stuff present. So in these public spaces, since it is kind of a public space, I'm not sure that there is room for that type of monitoring. So
Okay, all right, and I think that also brings up some more interesting ideas for our students in thinking about how this could open up more research avenues by looking at research in Facebook groups where they're more moderated, like you mentioned. And that's absolutely true, because you have to be more careful when you're in a group setting than out in a public space where you don't know anyone possibly in the comment section. And what does that lead to? So lots of research in that area that could be very exciting to build upon. Any questions from the audience, please? Yes, go ahead, Kadam.
Yes, thank you, Kelly, for this interesting presentation, and congratulations again for publishing this article. I just have one question, actually. I know you have looked at comments for participants interacting on social networking sites for mothers, and then at the end you linked the results you found to a large American culture ideologies for motherhood. Were the commenters' ideologies and geographical settings a matter, or you just like looked at the most relevant comments?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The two sites that I examined were sites that, as far as I did some research and could tell, were United States-based sites. I did, because of the nature of the data, I cannot make claims to any demographics, and I actually put that in my study, something about, just because this space is targeted at mothers, but that doesn't mean we should assume that everyone in there is mothers or that they live in the United States. However, I did see a lot of those big capital D discourses about motherhood present in this space. So whether or not that was from people located in the United States, I can't say for sure, but I definitely know that it's more of a Western type of ideology. So. Mm-hmm.
I do have a question, if that's possible. Thank you for this great presentation. I just want to ask this question. How do you see the impact of this interaction on the identity of a mother within the context of mothering, right? Yeah. So we see on social media, we see a lot of hypocrisy between a lot of displacement between our real identities and the way we try to formulate our identities in social media. So how do you see the impact of that interaction on social media, on mother's identity?
That's such a great question, and something that I'm really interested in. And one of the things that I can say, I'll say one thing that I definitely can say from my data that's more present in my paper, and then another I'll just kind of speculate. But I talked a little bit about in this presentation how mothers seem to be forming themselves into in groups and out groups, so gathering social identities. So in order to reaffirm, oh, I'm a breastfeeding mother, I'm a bottle feeding mother, people were very much forming those groups on social media. I absolutely think this has identity implications for individual mothers. I think one of the posts was about adoption, and there was a lot of feedback from people who were adopted, also mothers who had adopted children, talking about how hurtful the original practice shaming comment was, because it was kind of shaming that practice of adoption. And I definitely, could see some implications on identity there. But I would love to, interview people and have them talk more about that, so I could really dig deep into that. So.
I'm sorry, I just have a follow-up thing. I see there is a cultural dimension of your topic, and this is very interesting. I'm just wondering if you have looked at like scholars such as Homi Bhabha, right? When he refers to the formation of identity, how we formulate our identities. So that would be, an interesting maybe scholar to look at, his work.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's related culturally to the topic you are trying to do.
Can you say that name again? Because it kind of cut out when I.
His name is Homi Bhabha. He's an Indian,
okay.
And one of his famous publications is a book, Culture.
All right, thank you very much, Asim. Any other questions? Go ahead, Abukar.
Let me unmute. Hi, Kelly. I mean, thank you for this. I mean, it was really, very, interesting topic. I never heard of it before. Mom shaming, practice. This is new to me. So, since you went through the ground theory for your basis of the research, and also this is qualitative work. So my question is really, have you used, how was your coding process? What kind of tools did you use for the coding of those data or content that you found from social media or Facebook, especially that you showed us? How was the process for that coding that you did?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with this theory, there is a specific method called action implicative discourse analysis. And basically, you're taking a very close look at the data. So it might not, it's a little bit different than, these very larger, if you have a lot of data and you're looking at coding it through that. But otherwise, just kind of like a thematic analysis, very closely looking at the language, seeing what themes were happening. And then I also, went back into the data and looked and wanted to see if there was anything else, if there was anything I was missing. So I went through, I went through all the comments on those sites or on those posts, but it eventually ended up with that number because I felt that I had reached saturation and had not seen anything new in that. So, but yeah, if you want to learn more about grounded practical theory or ADA, it's Karen Tracy is the scholar who came up with ADA, and she has really great publications related to that. So.
Also, one follow-up, question that I had. You said traditional mom shaming. What does that mean? Traditional mom shaming? I didn't get it.
So mom shaming, when we think of mom shaming, would be like if me as a mother would say, like, I can't believe that you are feeding your child Kraft macaroni and cheese, or like, candy or whatever. Like you should make sure that your child eats better than that. So they're actually talking directly to me. And a big one that you see on social media is actually when moms will post pictures of their kids in their car seats. People will comment on their car seats and say things like, that car seat is installed incorrectly, like your child is not safe in the car. So that's a comment directly to that mother. While what I was looking at is the post. So I'll use the one where the mom was pumping breast milk in the marathon. That mom didn't make that post. That was on a public page, but people were judging her and also judging the practice of pumping and saying like, well, you shouldn't pump your breast milk. You should breastfeed your baby because there's a better bonding experience. Or why are you even running a marathon? You should be spending your time with your baby. But they weren't talking directly to that mother.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have a quick question, Dr. Khan?
Yeah, yes, please go ahead.
Okay. It's very interesting for you to mention the traditional nonsense with the differences in the internet, social media. So, are you also seeing different patterns? So, how have the internet and social media affected people to, like make targeting comments to the mothers? I know that, in the different topics like politics, people can just probably they are different with their own personality, so they become very brave, or they are pretending to know these topics well. So do you see like internet and social media also affected the way people do the mom sending in social media comparing to the traditional mom sending? Do you see any difference in terms of patterns or in terms of, like the variety of the words that they choose? Because we know that mom shaming exists even before social media is widely spread like nowadays.
Mm-hmm. I personally have not done enough original research on this topic to say what if I've noticed a change. However, I definitely think that this, what I talked about, this toxic disinhibition leads to people, again, feeling like what they're doing online is different than who they are in a face-to-face setting. And I do, that's one of the things that I always wonder is, would that person say that in a face-to-face setting? So some of the sources that I mentioned, Abbott's and more, they've done a couple studies where they've looked at this combative mothering in online spaces. So that might be some interesting research to check out. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. If there are no other questions.
I just have one comment. It's just still we have like a couple of minutes. There is the concept of the public sphere, right? There has been many studies discussing whether social media sites are considered, public sphere. So where people come together and discuss different topics freely and publicly. So this is, I believe, the setting, like you were just talking about, the reality and the online setting. I think most of it falls into this concept or a new concept of public sphere, right? Where we interact with people, and then that interaction has an impact on our identity in real life. So that's also another aspect of interest, might be of interest.
Yeah, and that's something that I thought a lot about in this study is the fact that this is a public space. And but at the same time, I think sometimes people are commenting on it, thinking of it differently. However, you could access this information without even having a Facebook account. And so it's based on review boards, based on Facebook's definition, it's a public space. And I think that that's important for people to recognize when they're interacting in this space. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you. Certainly lots of interesting directions of new research that could emerge from this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, looking at it in different contexts, different cultures, but at the same time, understanding what difference does anonymity and self-disclosure to that extent, and maybe including some form of literacy in training people that, this could be very harmful for other people. And this is also, I think, quite related to the research on bullying, where it has had devastating impacts on children in certain scenarios. Anyway, we're going to wrap up our presentation, our session today. Thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you all the participants for your wonderful questions, insights, and your time that you shared with us today. We'll have another exciting session for the Smart Dialogue series in about 2 weeks, same place, same time. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye.